Industrialization, beyond all doubt, is a strong driving force when it comes to economic growth and development of any country or nation. Right behind me is Coleman Wires and Cables, which was incorporated in 1975. It has grown beyond all odds and is now ranked the largest cable producers in the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa. I met with George Onafowokan, who now runs the business with his brother. Thank you for joining us in the studio this morning. Coleman Wires and Cable has grown to be the largest cable manufacturing industry in the whole of West Africa, which, I mean, is a very big deal, right? And then I also know that you have a reliable supply chain management system. This did not happen overnight. How was Coleman able to get to this point?
For us, Coleman was able to develop over time by putting certain right foundations from day one. For every business, you need to strategize, and you need to have your medium and long-term strategy. And for us, we had a more direct long-term strategy that we needed a lot of discipline, which is to ask ourselves, where do we want to be as a business in 10 years' time? Where do we see is our weak points? Where do we see our supply chain getting to be in 10 years' time? And that means certain amount of things have to be put in place. You have to put the right structures in place in terms of personnel. You have to put the right business framing in place in terms of manufacturing and capacity and capabilities over time. Then you have to look at the long term, because most of these things can never be achieved in one day. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at what you're trying to do, you have to look at your development plans over a time period and how you can place them. I think we got it right more than others. And we focused, I think one of the driving force was what I used to always say to people is that, look, as a manufacturer in Nigeria, nothing is impossible. It's just the ability for us to study this situation and look at our weak points, especially infrastructure, because there's nobody that doesn't have infrastructure deficiency in the manufacturing sector. And once you look at that, you should be able to work around it, because other businesses have survived and done well in the country. So the risks are high, but the benefit might also be as high. So for us, looking at all those holistically has made us to become where we are, surpassing even the expectations of our competitors and even surpassing the expectations of the country. And that's been a good thing.
All right, and then you just mentioned infrastructure. I was going to talk about it. I know how important infrastructure is when it comes to industrialization development in a country as a whole. I know that Nigeria is not where it's supposed to be in terms of infrastructure, right? But then manufacturing industries like yours require such help. How has Coleman been able to thrive despite infrastructural deficiencies in the country?
I think for Coleman, using Coleman as a case study, we looked at the infrastructure deficiency as being there. So there's nothing running away from it. Now, we're in a business that is power dependent. Almost 30% of your overheads to 40% of your overheads goes into power. Now, we're also one of the few industries where certain things we don't expect to be using generators to do. But it's only in Nigeria, and I've been to a lot of parts of the world where you actually see us using those heavy-duty power utilization machinery, actually using generators. So it makes the cost exceptionally high, capital cost exceptionally high. Now, the only way we've been able to go around it is to actually increase capacity to such volumes that you need to dwarf the actual power utilization or power deficiencies that you have. And we've managed to do that by going for technology rather than cost savings on machinery labor intensive. Now, if you go for a labor intensive machinery, it means your cost comes down. Yes, but then your overhead cost is high on the benchmark that is taking labor and is taking more time to do it. But invariably going down on the labor, increasing capital cost, and then going into technology means you spend high at the beginning, but it goes lower over time.
According to Forbes, less than 1/3 of family businesses transition to its second generation, and then about 50% of these businesses do not survive to the third generation. But Coleman has survived to the second. I mean, this is a second generation company. And now, talking holistically with other businesses, what would you say Coleman has done right, such that the business has survived to this point?
I think for any succession plan to work, the founder must get the ideology right, must have the ideal concept of succession planning. I think that's the basic foundation. We're lucky in terms of the chairman had the philosophy of succession planning predating even when he started the business. Now, but he said what he saw was that businesses like the Hiltons, the Guinnesses outlive the owners.
True.
The shareholders might be minor or might still be large, but the family still had a foothold in the business. And that gave them survival beyond the building. Now, he looked at it in Nigeria at that time, people making buildings or building properties as a legacy also had its downturn, as in you leave the world. At the end of the day, people sell the buildings and that's it. It's not guaranteed that it keeps those family earning. Mm-hmm. So he then focused his own legacy on building as many businesses as possible, which meant really not building as many properties as possible, but then looking at the legacies of those businesses in order for his children to actually create succession planning through them. And then he started the process of succession planning, which will be to encourage and tell his children about the business. So the fundamental importance is really how the founders take succession planning. So before they started creating, they start off as entrepreneurs without structure, they start creating structure. And as they create the structure, they bring in the children, if they have, or the successors into the business to understand the concept of the business.
I know of some family businesses that had their children get involved in the business, but once the founders or the founder died, that was the end of the business.
You have to have the right philosophy, I'll say, from the beginning. Not all your children, it's not a guarantee that even any of your children would want to be part of your business. But the way you sell it is like you're marketing yourself. I think the man marketed himself very well. You're selling the concept. You're selling continuity. You're selling things about your business. Because invariably, you selling this idea or bringing them in would either mold them into deciding what type of courses they would do. Sincerely, I decided my course during the time when I was working with him, I want to do accounting and finance, or I want to be a chartered accountant. Because I got interested in some aspect of accounting, because I used to come in most of the time and do work with the accounting department. And I enjoyed it that much. So I wanted to be an accountant. And so it also molds lives, because in my case, then I was experiencing what most likely I'm going to end up doing in life. Although I didn't end up, I became an accountant, but then didn't end up running an accounting firm, be where I am today. But the major focus is that you had the basic principle early. And he used to tell us then in those days, you need to learn to be a follower before you become a leader. Mm-hmm. So you won't come to his company and he'll give you a manager role. You'll come to his company and you'll be a basic junior officer. And those managers will send you on errands as the same way they'll send any other. It doesn't matter.
So it sort of gives you a particular mindset.
It does, because you don't have this eye up head of your head that you're the boss's son or daughter, irrespective. You're like an other employee, and you have a line manager who tells you what to do. And really, you must do what he says or she says.
How do you implement structure in a family-run business?
You have to decide that early. I think in every family business, structure is the hardest thing for them to quickly do, because structure also involves people that are not their family members. Mm-hmm. So, which means you have to trust some other people. And for me, I think I haven't spent 8.5 years of my life out of Nigeria, and I haven't spent a lot of it in Nigeria understanding how to work or do business on my own. I think it was easy coming back to Nigeria and looking at it. I said, look, there's no structure enough, and we need to segregate structure, and we need to develop structure. Structure is not something you create over time, because you're selling an idea of your company's vision, mission to people. And it takes time for them to either imbibe it or understand it. So you create structures in little bits. From when we started, I used to be head of sales, head of this, head of that. Systematically, your structures allow you to disseminate those powers to other people. So, but you build it in little drops. And as they understand it better, you devolve more power into your structures. As you create the structure around yourself, it is easier, because you see, structure is like having a team of people work together. And you're just there as the head of the team. They are like a pyramid, and you're there as the head of the team to help it coordinate. And that is what develops a good business. Once you can be able to actually create that team that are able to understand the vision of the business and mold the business according to that vision. And it's time. So you first create the basic principle of structure is to create the entries, which is, I always say, the entries are what allows you to disseminate power without affecting everything. You will not disseminate all your power at the beginning, because you're still just creating it.
So the concept of structure is what you build over time? You
have to build it over time.
All right, so being a second generation company, how are you able to boost your economy of scale? Because I reckon that you export to other West African countries.
We do. I think what we look at is this. Boosting economy of scale is trying to drop your cost in terms of producing a lot more per each minute, per each hour, for the cost to go down, for you to be able to actually move prices to a level. Now, what we've done, as I said, we've invested heavily in the past few years, and we're still investing. I think if we look at our investment portfolio in the next 6 months to 12 months, is in excess of almost 20 million US, and in the same industry. But for each investment, we look at what's the added value in terms of what would those machines bring, what type of level of production level would we be able to attain in terms of production efficiency, cost efficiency, production cost, and driving economy of scale upwards. Now, if you can drive all these things upwards, you'll be able to drive price downwards. Now, it makes us far more competitive for us to be able to sell local, and it also makes us competitive enough to be able to do exports. And how we've been able to achieve that is to focus on the long term. Long term being is that you have to not look too much into the capex cost, which is the capital outlay, and look at the long-term benefit of the capital outlay, maybe in 5 years, 10 years' time. That makes you more competitive.
I think that's a mistake a lot of us make, a lot of business owners make. They are more concerned about the now than the future.
Yes, it's a Nigerian, for us, it's majorly Nigerian way of thinking. Not because people want to think that. The cost of funds is high. The cost of collateral is high. And when you look at all this benchmark, it's as if they have a underlying problem before they even start. So if I'm having a financial cost issue that is hard to, going to your bank and saying, please, I need 500 million, it's not an easy thing, even for the bank.
It's bizarre for someone.
Yes. So not to even talk at the stages of early stage when you're looking for small 5 million, 10 million, it's difficult for most of those banks to see why you need it. And then you have a fundamental problem in Nigeria, which is collateral. Everything revolves around collateral. But I look at it this way. You build collateral over time, and you build collateral with your direction. Now, capital build is what also builds this collateral. So every time you expend money, you're actually increasing assets, you're also building collateral. Now, it's about planning this asset build that gives you that leveraging power, because leveraging on your asset is what builds your business. Now, how do you leverage on this asset is the understanding. It's a long-term process, as I always say.
So we'll take a quick break now. When we come back, we'll continue with how to leverage on your assets to boost your business. We'll be right back.
Which kind of wire you gonna need to light up your light? Oh man, the quality wire. Now which kind of cable you gonna need to light up your house? Oh man, quality cable. Coleman quality. Coleman wire. Coleman durable. Coleman cable. Coleman cable for any kind of project. Coleman be the
Welcome back. All right, you were talking about how to increase efficiency in the company.
Yes, as I said, the efficiency of the company and the collateral-based part of it. And when you're looking at efficiency, if I take efficiency as a fundamental and trying to get the economics scale up, you need to actually increase capital. Nigerians are very good at one thing. We have skilled hands. But the problem we have is that we have the deficiency of the power and the infrastructure. So the only way you can actually create efficiency is to try and increase efficiency per each minute of production, each hour of production. Produce as much as possible. So that way, now this ideology that labor is cheap in Nigeria, I don't believe in it. Really, labor is not cheap because we go the expensive way to actually produce, which is labor intensive, and then it makes labor very expensive. Now, for you to actually make labor that is inefficient efficient, you need to use technology. Technology being automation. How to automate. Now, automation is never cheap. The more you automate your processes, the less number of people you need, the more cost it becomes, the more costly it becomes. And that should be our driving force. Now, the problem is always an issue of how do you raise capital for those type of investment. And I look at it that, look, it's not impossible. Yes, someone might say, yeah, Coleman is big today. That's why you say CapEx is easy. No, it is not. My own background of the business is we started from a negative position. And we were a small business with less than even assets of over 50 million. We didn't even have 50 million worth of assets in terms of that. And our total book portfolio of debts or borrowing was not even up to 5-6 million at that time. And it was maxed out. So when you look at it, we've gone from there to where we are today in terms of assets of 50 million. Today we have assets of almost 20 billion. Now, how do you grow a business from 2002 from 50 million to, I think we even already had 20 billion over by the time we're getting to 2014-15.
Hold on, at this point, I would like to know, at what point did you break even in the business?
Breaking even is a difficult grammar. I don't like using that word because everybody says breaking even, because each project has a different break-even point. Now, but you see, the problem is that when you're developing your strategy, you can't look at break-even. I think, you see, for those of us that have studied this accounting, I think there must be a far better understanding of use of the word break-even. Because in a business scenario, break even for a project that is simultaneously sometime evolving along other projects is difficult for you to calculate. Otherwise, what will happen is that you're actually doing that project, you'll stop until you see break even before you implement another one. Now, I don't believe in that philosophy. My own philosophy is, where are we going? And is that part of our vision? Not
so
everyone.
You have to keep reinvesting.
You have to keep reinvesting. Now, at the point when you see break-even happening, it will almost work in simultaneously with the other projects. But for me, I've always believed that, look, we can do it in Nigeria. We don't have to import everything. And for Coleman as a policy, we never import any cable in our name.
What percentage of your raw materials are locally sourced?
We're proud to actually say that almost 80% now. I'll give that to recession. So recession was a good thing. 2015, 16, 17 recession, or 15 to 16 recession, was actually a good thing for Nigeria. It made us backward integrate. We have 2 or 3 companies that are backward integrated about 70% of our import. We are also in the process of, by next year, also implementing that same backward integration into our process, although in a bigger scale, where it will push it to about 95%. So at that level, really, that is shown comfort that, look, Nigeria has moved away from cable that every raw material is imported to a cable industry whereby 20-30% of it is only imported. And that helps us a lot.
All right, let me quickly ask about the African Free Trade Agreement, which was or is supposed to help boost our inter-Africa trade by about 52.3% from its current 19%. But then the president did not sign the agreement. How do decisions like that affect manufacturing industries like yours?
I was part of the delegation that was with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and his team in Abuja 3 days before they were meant to sign with the President of MAN, Dr. Jacobs. And you could have seen, I think the delegation was about 50, 60 of us in different facets of industry, and it was all negative. We were impressed that after listening to what we said, they just canceled the trip. Really. And because they had not consulted enough. You see, we need to protect our industry. I think Nigeria makes one mistake. Yes, we're the giant of Africa. We are the most populous black country in the world. But we cannot just accept everything. We seem to be accepting everything at our own cost. Why we were arguing over after at that time, saying no to it, is that the consultation was not enough. What were they going to protect? We all didn't know. What aspect? Because after it's a good idea, it's laudable. Yes, Africans must actually integrate. We need to sell to each other more. We don't. Africans sell raw materials out and buy it all back. Why, instead of selling even to themselves the raw materials and building different industries?
Like in the case of our crude oil.
Yes, we don't. Now, but the problem is that the fundamental biggest part of it after that we're all worried about is how do you protect us? One, protect our own industry. Protect that someone else doesn't use another country as a labeling block. What I mean by labeling block is that they say they're manufacturing, but they manufacture nothing. They just went there, repackaged the thing, labeled it that country, and shipped it to you duty-free. Now, it becomes a problem when you cannot identify those type of things. You need to tell us how you're going to identify it, how it's going to be done, and how the industry will be protected. And the 10 years or 15 years where you're supposed to protect certain numbers of your industry, what industry do you want to actually protect? There were so many questions. So I think they did the right thing. I think after it still happened, and I was not surprised South Africa did not sign. Now, if South Africa has signed, we could have queried ourselves and said, maybe South Africa technically is the most industrious in Africa, did not sign after. So why should Nigeria have been gung-ho about signing after? It will be to the disadvantage of their own industry because you didn't give enough protection for this industry. So those are the key things. We need to fundamentally learn to protect ourselves. Now, today, the Chinese are the biggest in the world when it comes to export. But they were not years ago. I was reading some documentation at a point in time in the 80s. Nigeria was number 80 in the world in terms of wealth size. China was 144. Today, China is number 2, whereas Nigeria. That's the key question. China joined WTO. You see, it's the same thing like after. But when did China join WTO? They were smart enough to protect themselves first. Close their industry, close everything. Make sure you've achieved all, or majority. Then now go and join trade organizations where now I open my door to you. We need to be careful in jumping. You know, we jump onto environmental rules because some guy in developed world tells us this is how we should do. But this same guy was polluting the world at the point in time.
Okay, so we're running out of time now, but lastly, I would like to ask you, what advice would you give to small-scale businesses that plan to go into the second generation and then the third generation?
I think for me, what I always advise when telling people about succession planning and the next generations is that, look, plan it early, decide early, groom your children early. It's not gender dependent, it's boy or girl, doesn't matter. Pick the child with the most prospect, and it's not age dependent. We also make that mistake. My first child, boy or girl, should be the successor. It's not a guarantee. It's based on their capacity, capabilities. That should be the driving force of picking successors, just like when you interview any manager in your business. Then secondly, you groom them from bottom up. Never groom them top down, which is always wrong, because they will have no basic understanding of what it is to
run a business.
So it's always better bottom up. And lastly, what I always add to it, which I added recently, and I say to them, once your successors are known, and they've started the process of succession planning. It takes about 5 years to put a full successor through, sometimes even longer. Once they know, add one key fact, and this is mostly for the Nigerians, founders, security. I think they always leave that out, because we make the assumption that the child being there or representing or working for the company is security enough. Now, most of them don't put this in writing, what happens to their MDs or their CEOs or their EDs. So security is never an issue. It was always going to be a debatable issue when founders leave. That's first generation problem to second generation. Once they can try to solve that and put something in writing, then it will help.
All right. Thank you very much for joining me in the studio today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.